Everyone is interested in the Middle East. It's in the headlines all the time. If you were to just include some things about Israel and the Middle East in your sermons, people will be interested because they're asking questions about that.
What does a leading U.S. pastor think about Israel on its 75th anniversary? And how can good theology lead to good understanding of what's going on in the epicenter? Hi, and welcome to Inside the Epicenter with Joel Rosenberg, a podcast of the Joshua Fund, a ministry dedicated to blessing Israel and her neighbors in the name of Jesus. I'm Carl Moeller, Executive Director of the Joshua Fund, and today we're talking with Joel Rosenberg in Jerusalem to answer that very question and introduce a special guest. Joel, our special guest is Skip Heitzig. Would you like to introduce him?
I'd be happy to, Carl. Great to see you across the planet, and shalom from Jerusalem, and shalom, Skip. Skip Heitzig is a wonderful pastor of one of the largest churches, evangelical churches in the United States. He's based in Albuquerque, New Mexico. He's a California boy, though. Really came to faith during the Jesus Revolution, and really radically saved. We're going to do two podcasts back to back. And so in the next one, we'll talk about his testimony. Maybe he'll weave in some of it here, but we'll go into more depth in the next podcast. But Skip, I'll give more details in a moment, but you're the pastor of Calvary Chapel, Albuquerque, and it's a church of about 15,000-ish. Maybe I've lost track, and a dear friend. Great to see you, my friend.
It's great to see you, Joel, and to be a part of this. I get to watch and get your other podcast, so this is an honor to be a part of this one.
Well, I appreciate it. So Skip is not just someone who's deeply studied theology, is a senior pastor, planted the congregation that he leads years ago with his wife, and it has just grown and has been such a huge blessing, not just to Albuquerque and the broader community in New Mexico, but Skip serves with Franklin Graham on, I believe it's on the Billy Graham Evangelistic Association board. Is that right? Or is it Samaritan's Purse?
Samaritan's Purse.
All right. So Greg Laurie is on
Yes.
the GEA. You're on the Samaritan's Purse side, but it's all pretty much integrated in
Yes.
Franklin's world. But the other thing which is interesting to me is that when I first published my first nonfiction book, Epicenter, I was invited very early on to come speak at a little tiny congregation in New Mexico, just outside of Albuquerque. But it happened that the people that invited me, the sister of the wife, was a very dear childhood friend, was going to your church, Skip, and said, hey, I don't know if you've ever heard of Joel Rosenberg, but he's coming to our church. And you and Lenya, your wife, invited me to come have dinner with you and your wife and some of your colleagues. And that led to not just a friendship, but quite a partnership. We've gotten a lot of things done over the last 17 years or so.
Yes, I remember that meeting, and I remember when you first spoke here. And I was thrilled to have you speak because you had written your first novel, I believe. And it was just so well timed. I mean, nobody saw that coming September 2001. But I love the fact that you have the background that you have as a Jewish believer and what you bring to the table. But beyond that, just your writings are so compelling. One of the things everybody tells me who reads your book, they can't wait for the next one. And I know you're working on that, but
I'm working on it. Yes. Always working on it. So I remember we had dinner at PF Chang's right there in Albuquerque, and it was you and your wife, and then your director of media, Chip Lesko, and his wife, Larissa. And out of just that dinner, oh my gosh, you had several ideas. You're like, all right, your love for Israel, and God seems to be raising you up to teach and communicate to the church. So here's the things we ought to do together. First, we want to help you build a website for the Joshua Fund. I'm like, okay. And then you said, and we ought to do a tour of Israel, like together, but maybe we could get like a bunch of churches to do this. Why don't we do a conference? Why don't we do a big conference on Israel and prophecy? We called it an Epicenter conference. And you said, why don't you bring 200 or 300 people? I'll bring I'm like, 200 or 300 people? What planet, Skip, do you live on? I realize I've taken like nobody in the past, and now you want to. But that's exactly what happened. We did the Epicenter conference in Jerusalem. 2,000 people came. Pastor Chuck Smith, now was famous before, but now with the Jesus Revolution movie, people think that Kelsey Grammer was the pastor of Calvary Costa Mesa. And then out of that came, hey, we ought to do a documentary film about your book Epicenter and talk about at the 40th, I think it was the 40th anniversary of the reunification of Jerusalem. And it was going to be 2007. You're like, we ought to. And I said, that's like a couple months away. What are you talking about? Create a whole film for that? Oh, absolutely. And so we did, and we interviewed Netanyahu, and then we ended up doing a radio broadcast to promote the documentary film from a radio studio at the top of the Empire State Building in Manhattan. And you guys, you and your wife and Chip and Larissa were like, well, we have an evening off. Why don't we go see Letterman? I'm like, wow, I really like the way these people think. They are not inside the box thinkers. So that's just a few ways I want our audience to know how passionate you are about Israel and the neighbors, but also how creative you are and how quickly you were like, I got ideas. Let's do stuff together. And I was just like, okay, let's go. Yeah. Where does all that come from?
Well, probably ADD. I mean, that's what my wife Lenya tells me I have. But, what I remember about you is you were just at a place in your life, and I think that's probably your secret, is you were just so open to ideas, and your ideas are good. Joe, you have a very interesting mix. You're highly capable. Your background in politics, and etc. I mean, for who you are, what you do with All Israel News, All Arab News, the books you write, it's the perfect combination that God has given you. He's given you a platform, and I just remember seeing that early on. Like, this guy, I knew people were getting to know you through your books, but what you have to share, the unique perspective you have to share, I always thought needed to get out there. And it was an honor to partner on that film and that conference. I thought it was an epic time.
Epic for the Epicenter. Yeah, well, I appreciate it. And I am very thirsty to be and hungry to be around people that have good ideas. I have some, but sometimes I have ideas that seem great to me, and not everyone around me thinks that. But when God uses a team and brings people with different skill sets and different resources and different perspective to say, hey, what if we did this? What if we tried that? Carl is definitely one of those people. Skip, you're just getting to know Carl here on this broadcast, and we need to connect you guys more. But just as a way of connecting you guys, when we needed to hire a new executive director, because our other one had done a great job, but it was deciding to move on, I said, I told the board, we need someone like Carl Moeller. And they're like, okay, who's Carl Moeller? I'm like, well, he ran Open Doors with Brother Andrew for 9 years. He ran the International Bible Society, known as Biblica. He was on, Campus Crusade for Christ staff. He worked at Saddleback for a while. A guy like that, somebody's got to have global experience. He's got to have a passion for Israel and the neighbors, the Arab Muslim neighbors, and some experience in the region. I didn't actually expect that Carl himself would be interested, but I'd known him, and I just thought he's sort of the model in my mind, and he has brought all kinds of great ideas, including, Joel, let's do a podcast. I'm like, a podcast? I don't know how to do a podcast. I never did a podcast. And so I'm grateful for you two. You guys are a fount of many blessings in my life. And people give me a lot of credit for stuff that was never my idea. The Joshua Fund was not my idea. All Israel News was not my idea. These are people who came to us and said, these are things we think you should do. Would you pray about it? And my first answer was, I'll pray about it, but I think the answer is no. but I was wrong. And fortunately, the Lord overruled me. And so Skip also serves on the board of Near East Media, which is like the holding ministry for all Israel news and all Arab news. So let's talk about how a California surfer who was far from Jesus, we're going to, in the next podcast, we'll talk about how you came to Jesus, but how did you develop a love for Israel? And as we hear at the 75th anniversary, and literally as you and I are recording this, we are just about an hour away here in Jerusalem from the sun going down and heading into the actual, on the Hebrew calendar, the 75th anniversary. Obviously, on the Western calendar, it's May 14th, but we're on a lunar calendar here, so it moves around a little bit. But so where does this love for Israel come to you personally?
Yeah, that's a good question, I think, given my background. I'm a German Catholic, so there's and completely Gentile.
Well, that's obvious then. You were going to fall in love with it. And you got a German Lutheran on the other. He's our host, so I feel outnumbered.
Yes.
Yeah. So the odds of just Carl and I getting together are slim, let alone this.
We fought
triangle.
Our own wars.
Happy to be the Jewish evangelical bridge between you all.
So I grew up in a home that really did not pay Israel any attention whatsoever, Judaism any attention whatsoever. And so what happened to me is I was exposed to the Bible through Chuck Smith. After I came to Christ with the Billy Graham ministry, I went to a church called Calvary Chapel, and Chuck taught the Bible. Anybody who spends any time in the scripture is going to be confronted over and over again with the name Israel or Jacob or all these Jewish names and place names and cities. And so one is naturally going to wonder, well, is that place real? And is it still around? And then Chuck Smith would take tours to Israel. And so anybody going to a church that loves Israel, teaches the Bible, is going to naturally fall in love with the people God made a covenant with. And that's what happened to me. So what happened to me is in like 1978, somebody visited our church from Israel who was part of the kibbutz program for volunteers. And it was a movement. It was right around the 30th anniversary. That's when I went to Israel the first time, the 30th anniversary of the land. And so he was inviting the young people. I was a young person once, and that was when I was young. And he invited the young people to come and volunteer on kibbutzim in Israel to work the land, to live there for several months. And I, that night, said, God willing, I'm going to join that first group. And I signed up.
Tell people what a
involved.
kibbutz is, because not everybody listening knows what a kibbutz is.
A kibbutz is like a farm. It's a farm, kind of a socialist experiment in Israel that served Israel well during its first years regathering in the land. They're still around. There's variations of those collective farms that go by different names, but a kibbutz is a place where people from different parts of the world usually congregate in one place on a farm, work the land, will sell their produce to other parts of the country. We specialized in growing avocados. We specialized in a metal factory. And different of these farms or gatherings specialize in produce or endeavors, and they cooperate, sell, do business with other parts of the land. So
how old were you then when you said, yes, I want to do that?
I was in my early 20s.
Okay.
When I went the first time. So I was born in 55. That was 1978. So I was in my early 20s, and I had just met my future wife, Lenya. I knew her, and she had traveled. This was my first time overseas anywhere, and It was Israel.
Wow.
And so I'd never been on an overseas flight. So this is exciting to me.
Wow.
And I remember it cost to go to Israel. The plane ticket was about $600 round trip. But you land in Tel Aviv. They pick you up at the airport, put you in a van or a truck, take you to the kibbutz, and you just work day in and day out. And every few weeks, they'll put you in that truck and drop you off at a site like Sea of Galilee or Jerusalem, give you a few days, pick you back up, and you just sort of have to fend for yourself and see the land. That was my first experience.
Did you have other young people in this program that spoke English that you could pal around with, or were you all with just Israelis?
Yeah, there were 12, 13 of us from Calvary Chapel, Costa Mesa, and they took us to a kibbutz up north called Kibbutz Gaton, which is near Nahariya on the seacoast, close to the Lebanese border. We used to hear gunfire at night, machine gun fire from the border, and the incursions that the PLO were making against Israel. So it was a very exciting time, and they would just they put us all like in two huts, one for gals, one for guys, made out of plywood with little beds on them. No air conditioning, no heating.
This wasn't the King David 7-star hotel in Jerusalem. This wasn't, the David Citadel.
This was a -1-star hotel.
Yeah, -1. Hey, guys, we got to take a break real quick here. But Skip, when we come back, I want to hear, and I'm sure Joel will ask more about what you've seen. You've been to Israel now. How many times? How many times have you been to Israel? 41 times. So that initial experience in the kibbutz was quite different. And Israel has changed so much in these 75 years of its existence. I'd love to get your perspective when we come back on what that looks like from where you are. But let's take a break right now, okay? Our verse of the day today is found in Romans 10:14 and 15. How then can they call on the one they have not believed in? And how can they believe in the one whom they have not heard? And how can they hear without someone preaching to them? And how can anyone preach unless they are sent? As it is written, how beautiful are the feet of those who bring good news. Our prayer requests today are to pray for ministers around the world that they come to understand the scriptures deeply and are willing to teach it without fear or favor. And to also pray for the people of Israel that they would come to understand and know their Messiah and all that was written concerning him in the Bible. Well, we're back. Skip, it's great to hear these stories. I mean, I've seen a kibbutz. I've never stayed on one, but that is a remarkable experience, a first-time experience with Israel. I don't think a lot of our listeners, even those who've come to Israel, have had a chance to stay on a kibbutz. But maybe you can give us some further insight into what it's been like to see Israel develop over the years that you've been going. Over 41 times. 41 times is a lot. And just give us some perspective maybe from that early visit to where you are now with Israel.
Okay, real briefly, one of the things I noticed when I went on the kibbutz the first time was their interest in why Christian, especially Gentile Christians, who would have no compelling reason to be in Israel. What are you doing here? Why did you leave your home in the United States to come here? And they did not understand our love for them or for the Messiah. So we had an opportunity to live before them and share that. But what helped is that we worked hard and we determined, let's be the hardest workers on the kibbutz. So when we have opportunity to share the gospel, it's backed up by we're here to serve you, and we're not like soft Americans who don't want to do anything. Yeah. And we did. We worked really hard, and they were impressed. They even came to us and said, we usually think of Americans as very soft and not wanting to do any work and relegating it to somebody else, delegating it to somebody else. But you guys are different. So tell us why and tell us what you're doing here. And we had an evening together with the entire kibbutz population. I was able to bring my guitar out and sing for them, tell them about Yeshua, tell them about our love for their Messiah, thank them for being the caretakers of the promises all these years. And it really formed a bridge. And some of those were long-lasting relationships for years. Yeah. And we even saw a couple people on the kibbutz, 2 to be exact, that I remember, make decisions to follow Yeshua. which was, especially at that time, was just unheard of.
Yeah.
true.
Wow.
So that was beautiful.
We've done programs about how hard it is for Israelis to accept Yeshua as their Messiah, and as the number of Israelis at that time that had made that decision was probably just maybe a few dozen. Joel, you've probably had a lot more experience with how that progression has happened, but tell Joel, maybe you can also just dive into a little bit the growth of the body of Messiah in Israel in this time, and where Israel is today. I mean, this is the celebration of the 75th anniversary of Israel's founding, and all of this is so pertinent right now. Absolutely.
Well, so by 78, there were probably a few hundred believers in Yeshua in the country. I'm not saying just 200, maybe 300-400, but there weren't that many young people at that point. When Israel was founded in 1948, the modern state of Israel, the sovereign state of Israel, we know that there were only 23 actually known Jewish followers of Yeshua, Jesus, in the entire country of Israel. 23 in 1948, and you're like. And some of them are still alive today. And Lynn and I have gotten to know them. And it's like, for an American, it's like knowing a Christian who stepped off the Mayflower to help found the country. Like, how am I getting to know the first generation of believers? And now so when you go from 23 to a few hundred 30 years later, you can see how slow this was going. From that point in 78 to where we are today, there are now about 30,000 Jewish followers of Jesus here in the land. There are a number of other Israeli followers of Jesus who live outside the country, but roughly now we're at around 30,000. So 75 years, you've gone from 23 to 30,000. So that's certainly growth, and that's good. That's encouraging, but it's not exactly, it's not the spiritual awakening that we pray for and that we see when we look at Ezekiel 39, for example, when the war of Gog and Magog is complete, when God has supernaturally stepped in to protect Israel from its Russian, Iranian, and other enemies that are coming to devour us. God says He's going to pour out His Spirit on the whole house of Israel. He says He's going to stop hiding His face from His people. And so we know that's an inflection point in which a lot of Israelis who may have had seeds planted earlier will start to come to faith in very, very large numbers. And of course, we know Romans 11:26 tells us eventually all Israel will get saved. We won't go into the theology of that. We are going to do that on a future podcast. But so that is encouraging. But there's other things that are encouraging too. So in Ezekiel 37, of course, there are two major prophecies. One is the rebirth of the sovereign state of Israel out of the ashes of death and destruction. We now know was the ashes of the Holocaust, and that's the physical rebirth. The Jews coming back to the land, resettling the land, making the deserts bloom, rebuilding the ancient ruins, building an exceedingly great army, and basically becoming a sovereign people and political state again. That is happened starting in 48 and going forward. We see that in motion. But the other major prophecy in Ezekiel 37 is sort of trailing the physical rebirth of Israel will come the spiritual rebirth of Israel. And we are seeing, again, not as fast as the number of Jews in the United States, for example, coming to faith in Jesus. There were, maybe a few hundred when I was born in 1967 in the United States. But in the Jesus Revolution, that's when the curtain went up. That's when my parents came to faith. That's when I came to faith. And then many Jewish ministry leaders who are major leaders, either in congregations or in large organizations, came to faith in the early years of the 1970s. And now we're at about 900,000 Jewish followers of Jesus, Jewish evangelicals from a Jewish background, in the United States alone. So when you put all that together, we're at about 1 million worldwide, which is pretty extraordinary when you see that growth. But all of it trails behind the dramatic birth and growth of Israel. It's security, the building of the. We say that, we joke here that the crane is the national bird of Israel, but by that we mean the cranes that are building
the building crane,
offices, because they're everywhere. The country's growing. When you were there in 78. My first trip was in 87 to study at Tel Aviv University. It was a pretty poverty-stricken, pretty simple country. I think there was one, skyscraper maybe in Tel Aviv. I don't remember it being a thing. And now, wow, they're everywhere. So let's go back to Skip. You've seen so much change, but we've also seen another change. We've seen the change that our generation, the three of us, and those older than us, really, a lot of evangelicals developed this great love of watching Israel come back to life, geopolitically and spiritually. But we've got a younger generation, under 40, under 30, that these are evangelicals that aren't against Israel, but by the polling that the Joshua Fund and All Israel News has done, we are finding that young evangelicals are shifting into the I don't know what I think about Israel camp. And Skip, since both as a pastor, but also as a young person who didn't have a lot of background about Israel, but then because of the teaching of the scriptures and you getting to go there, this transformed your, it became a central principle in your overall ministry. Just give us some thoughts about what you think is happening with young people not tracking with what their parents and grandparents understand about God's plan and purpose for Israel and the Jewish people. Because it's a concern of mine as we head into the 75th anniversary year.
I think there's two strains, two rivers that sort of have created this among young people. One is educationally, the other is theologically. Theologically, replacement theology, reform theology that marginalizes Israel or has a different viewpoint eschatologically in terms of interpretation of the Bible. They don't see Israel as a relevant player. The church replaces Israel in their view, number one. And there's a lot of preachers in the United States in that camp that have become role models for lots of younger pastors. So that's one river. The other is educationally. There's college campuses that are filled with activist Palestinians or groups that are against Israel and protest avidly. And I speak to college kids all the time who have heard that ranting, and they're afraid of those demonstrations, and so they'll cower back or take a second look at it. So those I know there's more, but those are the two main ones that I see that are largely responsible for that.
Yeah, I agree with that, and it's something that Carl and I and our team are spending time on because one of the major elements, as you know, Skip, because you've been involved with us literally from the get-go. We started the Joshua Fund in the summer of 2006, and by September or October, I remember I was sitting with you at PF Chang, and we were now saying, well, what can we do to help get this educational message out? But I think that I agree with you, and I want to focus on that educational side for a moment. It's not just that there's so much pushback in the media and on college campuses, so much anti-Israel discussion going on. But going to the point of the scriptures that you just read, Carl, while in Romans 10, the Apostle Paul is certainly talking about the gospel. That's clear. How can people believe in the gospel if nobody's ever told them the gospel? And how can people be told the gospel if no one is sent to tell the gospel and so forth? But that's also true of any good theology, right? If we don't teach young people the theology that Israel is described by God as the apple of his eye, the literal lenses by which he looks at the rest of the world, and super sensitive to him, right? Don't poke him in the eye because that's Israel. And so if we're not teaching that, the gospel started in Jerusalem by an Israeli Jew who died on a cross and rose again, and that's relevant. It's not incidental. I mean, God could have put Jesus in Japan or Brazil or Kurdistan or Canada or the United States, but he didn't. He chose specifically to send the Messiah through a descendant of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And so when that's not being taught in a congregation, then how are young people supposed to know it? Or if their parents and grandparents are going to a great congregation that's biblically healthy on all major issues, including Israel, that doesn't mean I'm learning that Sunday schools and youth groups are teaching it, because not all Sunday school teachers and youth group leaders think that Israel is a part of the story that they need to share with young people. And so I think parents and grandparents who really love Israel and get it biblically some are not even aware. They're not even realizing. They're not adding two and two together and realizing, oh, what I'm being fed from the scriptures is not what my young people are. That's not part of their diet. So no wonder they don't understand, and they're not convinced. This is a serious problem. It's true on their young people's view on marriage, whether it's only between a man and a woman, and a lot of issues. But I think the issue of Israel is certainly one of them.
Certainly. And I just thought of something. Part of the problem, a lot of the problem is in the pulpit. And it's not only that there is a replacement theology in many pulpits, but you could have good theology in many pulpits, but these are just pulpits that are silent. They just don't talk about these very issues. So it's like, if we know that 26% of the scripture is prophecy, but we don't teach prophecy, we're leaving out a quarter of what God has to communicate. Yeah. And it's one of the reasons I just completed I'm doing a series on the end times now, but it was a 5-week series on the place of Israel in prophecy.
Great.
And it's central. You can't escape it unless you willingly try to escape it, and there's no reason to do that.
Well, but that's true, but that's an interesting point, and let's take another point. And I think there are a number of pastors that they're not even fully cognizant that they're skipping Israel. I mean, some are. They're actively against it, or they're like, I don't want to talk about that. It's too political or too whatever. But there is a biblical narrative or biblical theology approach that says we're teaching the creation, the fall, redemption, and return, all of which are true. But you've just taken out all of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. You've just taken out 2/3 of the Bible because you've skipped the story of Israel. The creation doesn't involve Israel. The fall doesn't involve Israel. The redemption is Jesus in Israel, but you could skip the discussion of the whole point of God's plan and purpose for Israel. And then the return, yes, that's to Jerusalem, but by that time, the whole story's over. So, it's sort of like, so that would seem to many like good theology. You're not anti-gospel, you're not anti-Bible, but you have just dropped out a major element. And this is a problem in seminaries, in Bible colleges, and then in the pulpits. Yeah. Carl, you see it as well, right?
Well, I was going to say, Joel, I mean, this is one of the biggest challenges right now, is that we have an aggressive viewpoint that is anti-biblical in this sense. I mean, and certainly in the secular world, it's anti-biblical. And educationally, we are under this tremendous force of anti-God, anti-Israel, anti-Bible viewpoints. But then the church and even Christian colleges are not equipped, it seems, to be able to teach on this well. So that vacuum is not answered. That vacuum is then filled by what's left over from a secular media and worldview. It's really a huge challenge right now. We've got to fill that void through the pulpits and through the curricula in colleges. We've got to be able to start addressing that, which, Skip, I'm so grateful for your work. And Joel, obviously, I work for you. So there's a heart that we have to do this. But it's really a vital need right now as we see it.
Well, I think, Carl, one of the reasons I'm so happy that you've been here at the Joshua Fund for the last 3 years as our executive director is because you not only bring in your own theological training and experience with a number of different ministries that give you real unique perspectives on different silos or swaths of American evangelicalism and global evangelicalism. But also, you have a PhD in education. You think this way. It's not surprising that you thought one of the tools in the modern era is not just to write another book, but maybe a podcast where people can just be jogging or washing the dishes or driving or flying and just listen to a conversation about stuff that they might not have time to think about otherwise. Skip, you're very passionate about a wide range of media because you seem to think that you can't just teach it from the pulpit. So talk about the way you teach Israel, both from the pulpit, but also using a wide range of media. And maybe you have some ideas that our listeners might think, wherever they are located, ideas that they could tap into and think, yeah, that might be a good way for me to start teaching about Israel when I haven't really thought about that so much.
Wow, that's a huge topic. When it comes to media now, things are not monolithic. There's just so many options. It doesn't have to be synchronous listening anymore. It can be asynchronous. You can listen to it whenever you want or watch it whenever you want. You can curate your own channel. And so there's so much information out there that we decide, we do radio, we do television, we do a podcast, though differently than this. We podcast usually messages that we teach. We use Twitter and Instagram, et cetera, et cetera. But one of the things I'll just encourage pastors to do is to talk about Israel, if only from the standpoint that everyone is interested in the Middle East. It's in the headlines all the time. Yeah. If you were to just include some things about Israel and the Middle East in your sermons, people will be interested because they're asking questions about that. And then when it comes to us getting the word out about these things, when I put up a picture of the Sea of Galilee or of Jerusalem or whatever, people who are Bible geeks or Bible students, for that matter, just love the fact that they're visualizing what they've read about. And that's why I tell people, come to Israel. It'll change everything because it's the ultimate visual aid. You'll never read the Bible the same again.
Yeah. I just want to recap some of the ways, and for our audience, now put it in some context of ways you've helped us. When Joshua started, we didn't have a website. You thought, no, you need a website, and we can help you with that. We didn't think about taking large tours to Israel. I mean, they don't have to be large; they could be small. But the point is, we weren't doing tours yet. And you said, no, you need to do it. Here you're coming up on, at that point was the 2008, so that was the 60th anniversary of the rebirth of Israel. Like, this would be a good time to do a tour as well as a conference. I'm like, okay, that's a good point. And then you're like, you should make a documentary film. In other words, you have really helped me think about different ways to engage evangelicals, one who love Israel, because you always want to reinforce the base, and give a B12 shot to people who are healthy on this topic, so that they can go out and teach and share and talk about it with others. But also then, how do you draw in people who maybe are skeptical or they're not sure what they think? How do we engage them? And some are engaged, people are engaged in different ways. And not everybody wants to sit down and read a novel or a nonfiction book. So you've really helped me think through, hey, let's go do a radio broadcast from the top of the Empire State Building. Okay. Yeah. Lots of fun ways.
Skip, I love it that you and I both get to give Joel crazy ideas and then watch what he does with them. It's amazing. So,
well, Joel is an interesting animal. I mean, he is not literally an animal. He's an interesting person in that. He's this mix between a political analyst and a theologian, and I mean, a diplomat. I've just watched him in different contexts, and he's so capable at so many things. As an author, I mean, it's pretty astonishing, really.
I totally agree with you. Let me say this about Joel too, is I love to say that
Maybe I'll just drop off for a little while. This is embarrassing.
Sometimes it's uncomfortable, Joel, but you got to sit and listen to it. Okay. I think that God has uniquely crafted you, Joel, and Skip, you have also been sort of a catalyst in helping Joel come to terms with some of these things. I really believe that. I think the catalytic effect that you've had early on in Joel's ministry was to let him see how God has really given him a biblical theology and worldview that is so crucial to the church and to the believers here, given him current modern day geopolitical and, as you said, almost diplomatic engagement with the current leadership of the Middle East, both in Israel and the neighboring countries. And then you take that through line all the way to the prophetic, which doesn't leave Joel untethered, but has a biblical and current geopolitical background to be able to make comments about the prophetic realities that we look towards for the coming of Christ, the return, the restoration of Israel, all of these things, and to see that in a consistent way. I don't know of anybody else, honestly, in the Christian world today who has that unique combination.
And Carl, what are the odds that you would get an American evangelical man with Jewish roots live in Jerusalem and meet with Arab heads of state?
That's right.
And with favor. I mean, there's a favor shown toward him.
Amen.
That it's amazing.
Amen.
Well, so we got a few minutes left, but that's an interesting one because I want the audience to know also that Skip, again, serves on the board of right from the beginning of Near East Media, which is what is the ministry that launched All Israel News and All Arab News, again, as another way to think about how do we cover what's happening in Israel and the broader Arab Muslim world. Honestly, fairly, it's got to be real journalism, but it's got to be also explaining what does it mean? How do we view these issues and these trends and challenges and crises and opportunities from a biblical worldview, and how do we communicate that in a world where media is so hostile to Israel and the church? But also, you have come with me, Skip, and your wife on a number of these delegations. Would you share a little bit? I mean, you have to share the story of sitting with the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia. I've told your story on this podcast, but we haven't had you tell the story. So talk about from the moment I invited you, I don't know, maybe you thought I was crazy. Hey, let's go to Saudi Arabia and meet a possible murderer or the future king. I mean, that was a crazy trip, but share a little bit about why you came and what your conversation with the Crown Prince was like. It was fascinating.
Okay, so I'll do it. I'll try to do it briefly because of time, but I'll say this. The reason I think that God has given you favor in these areas is a four-letter word, love. You love Israel and you love Israel's neighbors, and you are uncompromising. You love Jesus. You don't hold anything back, but you do it in a very honoring way that the host or the ones who are hosting this for you and invite you over don't feel threatened, but they've developed a friendship with you. That's so unique. It's compelling to me. So the thing with going to Saudi Arabia and meeting with the Crown Prince in his palace and being able to share the gospel, you teed that up for me. You asked him in his presence. You said something like, "Your Royal Highness," or you probably don't hear the term evangelical Christian much in the confines of this palace, I'm guessing. And we have a pastor from the United States who could give you an explanation as to what an evangelical Christian is and believes. And so what you basically did is tee it up so I could share the gospel with them. And I remember trying to do that in a way that was honoring to the Lord and captured the gist of the gospel in a way that was understandable but not threatening to the audience. And I think he received it well, because it was just basically the message. This is what we believe, Your Majesty. We believe that God sent his son, his only son, Jesus, into this world on a rescue mission to save people from their sin. And he said, he died on a cross, rose from the dead, whoever would believe in him would not perish. It's just basically John 3:16 with a little more explanation. And after sharing that, you wonder, there's like in your heart a long silence, even though there probably wasn't in the room, but it just seemed like, what's he going to say to that? But again, the way you set it up and the love with which you approached that meeting, I think paved the way.
Wow.
I appreciated you being part of it. And then clearly it didn't offend him so badly that he didn't invite us back. And so when we went back the following year, then that was 2019. And then there was the opportunity for you to bring Lenya. And one of the things I loved about Lenya, we'll have to have her on the podcast at some point, but maybe you two together, because it's a great story. But just real briefly, Carl, I would just say that we had the opportunity to, of course, to ask these questions. We had 2 hours each session, each time we went. 2 hours with one of the most consequential and certainly the most controversial man in the Arab Muslim world, and at his invitation. But Lenya asked a great question. She shared about how she loves the various women in the Bible, and that one of the women that she's intrigued with is the Queen of Sheba, and she described her as an Arab monarch from the Arabian Peninsula, and how she got the Queen of Sheba got so intrigued with Israel, with King Solomon, with the wisdom of King Solomon, that she decided to make a journey to Jerusalem, and she just walks the crown prince and his top advisors in the room, in the palace there, through the story of how Israel and the Arabian world became friends through a woman meeting who just thought, I really want to go meet this leader of Israel and find out what's going on with him. He seems powerful, successful, militarily strong, economically strong, and he seems to know God. I want to go meet this person. Like, that was just beautiful to watch, because most women don't have an opportunity historically to meet the leader of Saudi Arabia. No unveiled woman has ever, well, that I know of, gotten that opportunity. And but an evangelical woman who gets to say, can I just share an interesting story from the Bible that I love, that is about this connection between Israel and your world, your Arabian world. And wow, that was fun. And again, he took that well. He could have kicked us out, but he did not.
Wow. It's truly amazing, guys. And Skip, I just love that story. I've heard it. To hear it from your mouth is also amazing. And Joel, of course, this has been really rich. We're going to come back and we're going to do more, Skip, on our next podcast with you. And I really hope our listeners will tune in for that one, because, we really need to know who you are from your background and how you got to this place to be able to have such amazing experiences and to show this. So again, thanks for this time, Skip. Joel, thank you so much. This has been amazing. I really appreciate it. And I know our
75th anniversary podcast. Yeah, you're the perfect guest for this, Skip. Thank you.
Exactly.
My privilege. Great to be with you both.
And, and to our listeners, thank you for listening to this podcast. We really depend on you to support and to encourage and to give us the topics that you'd like us to talk about. And if you'd like to learn more about the Joshua Fund, you can visit our website at joshuafund.com. And there you can learn about what we're doing in the Middle East to bless Israel and her neighbors in the name of Jesus. And how
and our upcoming trip.
I will tell about our upcoming trip. We have one coming up this year, and I'm sure in the show notes you can find out all about that trip coming up this fall. You can also participate in the work that we're doing through your prayers and your support. And as always, check out our show notes for anything you heard on the podcast you'd like more information on. For Joel Rosenberg and Skip Heitzig, I'm Carl Moeller. Thanks for listening to this episode of Inside the Epicenter.
I'm Joel Rosenberg. On your left, you'll find some videos we've chosen specifically for you. We look forward to partnering with you to bless Israel and her neighbors in the name of Jesus.